All right. Well, good morning. Good evening, everybody. This is the August 23rd, 2022 Notary Governance Call. And this one is a very full discussion topic. If you have not seen in the Slack Fil Plus channel, we have posted these slides. It's more helpful for you to follow along. In that slide deck is also copies of all the links to the issues. Sometimes we'll have those up as we go. Sometimes just to make it transition a little bit easier to watch, we might let you do that. So as a quick reminder, all the slide decks are in the Fil Plus channel in Slack. So with that, we have kind of a modified schedule for today. Typically, the way we run these calls is quick introductions, make sure we give you a chance to check in if you're a storage provider or notary, introduce ourselves. Then we spend some time on metrics. We're cutting the metrics out of this call to give a lot more time for discussion. We have quite a few issues that we're hoping to put on your radar, as well as get feedback from you. So if you're curious for the metrics, those links are always in the deck. You could check the Starboard dashboard and the registry, but the big call out, there wasn't any significant change from last week. So with that, friendly hello, my name is Kevin. I'm joined by Deep and RG Rajef. Galen is going to be out of the office on a well-deserved break. So just as a quick heads up, if you Slack Galen in a DM this week, it might take a couple of days before he gets back. So feel free to CC me on anything that might be urgent, and I'll be happy to help run that down in his absence. But we are the governance team to make sure that we're backing you up as you use the program. With this, if you're on the call, it's really helpful to have your name set to the organization that you represent. We talk about this every few times. Right now, my name says Kevin, but if I click on my profile, I can change it to Kevin FF. And the only reason we ask this is if we look back on the call and we're like, hey, we got great feedback from somebody, and if their name is like Zoom user, it's really difficult to kind of match what your feedback is to your GitHub. So just doing this is a really effective way for us to answer your questions and get back to you. So totally optional, but just makes the calls a lot more effective. We're going to be posting the link in Slack right now. This is to the Airtable log. This is where we track kind of attendance. This measures towards the Notary SLA. This is helpful for any storage providers that are on the line that may want to get involved later. You can say, hey, I came to 8 of those last 10 governance calls. And also for you as community members, like, hey, I was interested in the program. As you can see, I came to a few of these just to kind of build up my knowledge on it. So the link to this Airtable is going to be posted in chat shortly. If you don't see it there, you can also grab it in the deck. But please take the time to fill this out, because this is where we're going to be pulling that information from to actually link everybody back to this call and make sure that we have just a really clear login for who was on this. So here's the link right there in the chat. Go ahead. Oh, that's the wrong link. Sorry. Here's the link right now. So you have a reminder on the call as well as that link. So go ahead and fill that out and we'll take it out. So with that, here is the agendas that we kind of have lined out for today. We're going to start with 3 updates. And this will be us kind of briefing you, the community, to keep you well adversed into what's going on. So the first is I'll be briefing in Kevin Z's absence while he's enjoying a well-deserved break on the Fil Plus Enterprise, giving you some links, talking about what's going on and what's happening on that part of the program. The second is RG will be walking you through a trust and transparency, what's going on that side of the house and what you might expect to see coming. Deep will walk you through the recent outage we saw on the registry app, just kind of high level of what's going on, where it is now. And then you'll see the next sets are discussion points. So these are issues 5.3, 9, 9.3, 5.9.4, and 6.02. We intend for these to be much more conversation based. So this is your chance. If you had any issues in the GitHub, you wanted to raise and escalate those and make sure you have the time. That's why we've allocated a substantial part of this call to that portion. And then lastly, Deep will be walking us through the 2 FIPs that are outstanding that are going to impact the community. The intent is to not just put these on your radar, but also make sure that you might be tracking for any feedback as they go through. So with that, I'm going to pause and we're going to kick off. Again, if you have any questions or any comments, the best way to kind of kick off on this once we get to that portion is to click the raise hand button and it will unmute you in Zoom. And that way we can kind of go through it in an organized way. So with that, let's talk about the Fil Plus Enterprise program. So again, if you're curious to get involved or know what's happening, there is a Slack channel that handles all the communication for the Fil Plus Enterprise. It's this Fil Plus Enterprise working group. It's a public channel. You don't have to be invited. Just select that. You can lurk, you can comment, and a lot of the work that Kevin Z is doing takes place there. At a very high level, I call your attention to 2 points that are currently happening in that enterprise proposal right now. The first is 25, wow, storage providers have signed up to participate in that pilot. So we have a very, very diversified group, and we're really happy to see that. So props to you on the 25 that have signed up. Kevin's been holding regular working group calls, and the point of those calls is around discussion. I think one of the big topics that's come up recently is, what does the approval process look like when the notary gets the application? What is the notary looking at? What are the fields that they should index on? What is a good approval versus a bad approval? How much time should it take? So that's really been kind of the draw. You're going to see 5 links here on the right. And I listed these out just to make it really simple if you wanted to just quickly see what topics are coming up. And these are essentially the big working groups focus. So who's a lead storage provider that's looking at this? If you click on this link, you'll be followed to this GitHub issue, and you can see all the information that Kevin's like listed out on like what a lead storage provider looks like. Same thing on like, how does the Datacap go out? Can we make that process any more smoother? What's in the application for people that are requesting? You'll see this come up a little bit more frequently on some other teams right now, is how do we make this application process as quick, effective, and pulls out as much information so you notaries aren't having to constantly ask for the same set of information. Hopefully we can just get that in the first round. What does the SLA look like? How do we expect people to write back? What should be the notary's timeline? What should be the group key holders, the whole member of community? So all of these are listed in that working group. Again, if you're curious to get more involved, this is just an update, not a discussion. Please see this working group channel and you can find out everything you may want to know about that. So with that, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Feel free to come into Slack. And with that, I'll hand it over to RG for an update on trust and transparency.
Thank you, Kevin. So there are 2 main things that I wanted to flag from a trust and transparency side of things. One is that we're seeing an increased attempt to scrape legitimate websites. And so what that means is that that is something that we are taking care of in the review process. But then we also want to encourage the community and specifically clients as well to just go through open issues and see if someone is copying specifically your application, either the one that is open or one that has been successful in the past, just to make sure that someone's not faking to be you. We're also using historical data to develop risk scores that will be rolling out the next few months. And so just wanted to make sure that your organization or you as a client don't get bumped down on that risk score just because someone else is faking to be you. And so just they'll take a couple of minutes of your time, just please scan 3 issues. We ask the same for notaries. When you're signing an application, just go to the issues and see if a similar organization has been approved before, just an additional step. And then the second piece was there was a topic raised on the Fil Plus channel about requiring business licenses. And I just wanted to make clear that we only ask for business licenses when the relationship between the client and the organization isn't clear. And so if you're an SP or if you're a client and you want the process to move quicker, just be sure, just make an effort to make that relationship clear upfront, so that we don't have to kind of dig in as much to find out that relationship. So those are 2 main updates on the trust and transparency side. I really appreciate for those of you who DM me about concerns or flag things. Always appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks, RG.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for the unmute button. Hey, folks, just so you know, there was a little bit of an outage on the infrastructure side over the last couple of days. Thank you for those of you that flagged in Slack. The main thing that happened was that the underlying node that we use, so we use like chain access effectively as a service from a different team, had a change in how they were handling header tokens and like actually allowing you to connect to the network. And then that changed and we weren't notified before it changed. We only realized after, because when we reached out to them, they're like, oops, didn't think this would break people. So we made a modification. We're waiting for them to make a better longer term update. So there'll probably be a second slight outage for a couple of hours while we're ready to move to like the next version. But for now, it should be working and stable. I know some of you had issues even yesterday. I just want to flag that the changes that happened here should have been in like the last working day Europe time. So if you're waking up to this and you had problems with this, then please check it out again today and let us know in Slack if it's not working. And for those of you that are going to bed, go to bed and check it out tomorrow and let us know if it's not working. But hopefully at this point, it should be up and stable and working as expected. Cool. RG, you want to chat through this one instead of me?
Yeah. So right now we have two issues open. We briefly discussed them in the last governance call, but just wanted to reiterate on those. So the first one is a template for LDN exceptions. So in this case, the applications that are currently in the pipeline that have encrypted or private data, but are not part of eFil, we wanted to make sure that we are able to update the application for that, so that notaries in the community has more information and sufficient information to make an informed decision. So right now we haven't seen much discussion on this, so we want to make sure that the community is okay with it. We are hoping to close this issue soon. So if you do have any updates or concerns, please go to the GitHub issue and make your comments. Deep, if you don't mind, can you please put the issue in the chat? And yeah, so while Deep is doing that, we can discuss the next one. Awesome, thanks.
No, Kira has the right one. It's 593.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, it's the first one that Kira just posted. The second one is about increasing limit of data cap. This got a little more traction where we're essentially proposing to increase the current limit of 5 pips to 25 pips. If you look at the discussion, there's some back and forth and some reasoning behind why we want to do it. The main reasoning is around efficiency, both for the governance team, but also for notaries, just in the KYC process. So again, if you have any specific thoughts or concerns about this, please make sure to go to the issue and put down your thoughts. I know Deep has a hand, so.
Yeah, I just want to say there was that stuff. There were a couple of comments back and forth over the last week from somebody called Bobby Choi and RG, between the two of you guys, referencing back and forth on how this could not be as safe. And I think the main takeaway for me from hearing that out was basically people are not excited to see the allocation rate go up that much. Like, it's actually okay that the total amount of data cap being allocated is higher, but the rate at which it's being doled out may be too quick, right? So we're almost 5xing in a way what that first allocation could look like, going from like a 50 terabyte or 100 terabyte to a 250 or 500 terabyte allocation of data cap. And what's going through my head right now is maybe we should modify the LDN scope even to say, oh, for the allocation rates, like, let's do currently it says lesser of half of a week or 5% of the total data cap requested. We could add another modifier to that says 100 TB upper limit for that first allocation, or like 5, and then like 500 for the second, or even 250 for the second, 500 for the third. And that way, even if somebody's like requesting 20 pebibytes of data cap, there's still some ability to watch like deal making on chain. Like as a community, I think we need to make this trade-off between the likelihood that we block a client or like end up resulting in designing a bad user experience for somebody looking to onboard, versus ensure that we give them just enough to get data for the notaries to say, yes, this is trustworthy and useful. So I'd love to hear from people on that as well. RJ, I know you had some thoughts too. If you've got any, please.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely makes sense. I think to kind of limit the first few tranches to understand, the behavior of the client and how they're using data cap, and then eventually increase that, progressively. I think that definitely makes sense. I think one of the other things that we were considering, and I think one of the things that I wanted to touch upon more was there was a question about why we selected 25 instead of 30. And that is just based on, the kind of requests that we're seeing from the open issues that do have more than 5 pips of request. So again, I think that is not a hard kind of, that's still a proposal. So if people feel that that's too much or too less, we're more than welcome to alter that as well. So yeah, but I do think that, the concerns around trust and safety are valid, but I do think that in the medium term, the benefits that we'll get in efficiency will be a lot more, especially seeing the trajectory of how things are moving. We are getting about like 20 applications a day now. So, and we just hope, we expect this to increase multifold. So we just want to make sure that we prepare for that increase in traffic in the next couple of months. But yeah, I would love any voices in the community on this in these two issues. If you have anything, please raise your hand and we can unmute yourself. We can come back to this. I don't see any hands yet. So Kevin, I think we can move.
All right. I just put in chat this new modification that just came through in the governance repo. And essentially what this screenshot is showing and what the link is if you want to follow it, it's a flag from the community saying, look, if you are a storage provider and you're going to have any kind of say in like how this application is handled, who are the notaries that are coming on board, and this is just general, it should be fully disclosed and you should essentially like self-select, almost like in an American trial, you recuse yourself because you're too close to it or in a business transaction. So this modification is coming through at a very high level, just kind of flagging this, which makes it really nice for a discussion before we start to like build out the beef and the meat around it. And essentially what we'd like to talk about, and Deep will probably add some clarifications after I finish, is what would that look like? What would be the level that we would want storage providers to essentially say, I want to recuse myself or self-select out and have some consensus around that. So I'm not really involved. I've disclosed how much I know about these people. I've disclosed how closely connected I am and just made it public. Not saying that it's blocked, not saying it's going to be turned off, but just to have that added layer, as RG talked about earlier, of trust and transparency. So we're really hoping to get your feedback or comments on this. And I'll hand it over to Deep to maybe provide any additional context before we do that.
Yeah, I think one thing that I did want to say before I dig into the topic itself is like something at this level of conversation we could also theoretically have had in the discussion. But I do think there's enough thinking here that it's worth like talking about now, even as a proposal. I see a hand from who I think actually submitted the topic, so maybe we can let them speak to it first.
Hello guys,
Hey.
Deep and Kevin. Yeah, I wrote this proposal and I would like to give a brief introduction about it, if that's okay with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now I don't have to do it. Thank you.
So before we get started, so my name is Carolina English, and a lot of you have been curious about who I am. Thanks for reaching out through DM. I feel like I was being, very warmly welcomed. And as you can see in my name, I'm no notary, no SP, just your regular community participant here. So, well, yeah. As part of the community, I believe, our eventual goal is to include more data into the Filecoin network. Notaries, SPs, and the officials, you guys are doing like a great job to better improve the reputation of Filecoin. Appreciate all the efforts. And the prospect of Filecoin is to store data that is beneficial to humanity, if that's right, And this focus must be on the authenticity of the data. I think it's like, for me, it's not really accurate to say to include more data. In fact, the better term for me would be like more real data into the Filecoin network, which lead to my question here. Currently, there's a general agreement that notaries, they cannot approve applications which applied by themselves. but there's no regulation for projects in which they're indirectly involved, such as, you know, working together with other SP in the same project. Like I mentioned in the last time in the governance call, I don't know if any of you recall, like some people with both SP and notary status are, I mean, sorry about the word, I would say not very trustworthy in their judgment at the moment. Like even if the data is legit, the fact they are also involved in SSP can be, you know, very suspicious for me because the potential interest is in the project. I would say, like, for me, I believe that better community transparency and credibility of the application, or even a more direct way to say it, like the price of file requires notary to self-circumvent on projects they engage in as SPs. And I don't know how you guys think about this, to be honest. Like for me, I don't see any risk on improving it. And if any of you, have any different opinions, please join me here. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. Thank you, Dip. Kevin too.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to hear, actually. That's perfect. I'd love to hear if there are any thoughts. I have a few, but I'll hold them. I see a lot of hands popping up. So maybe, yeah, Wynand, and then we can hear from Danny as well.
Yeah. Although I understand where this is coming from, when my company like Decent has a customer, for example, a University of Amsterdam, and they want to store data on our network, how do you see this then? Should I be wary in helping them getting the Datacap posted, or are you saying I should not be sealing their data because maybe they would just require or that I store their data? And yeah, I just wonder how you see this, because even if you do this on a trustee basis, then yeah, I don't think there are many notaries around without any affiliation to an SP.
I mean, it's okay if you decide to engage in SSPs to onboard your client, but my point is, like, you shouldn't approve any DC to that. Like you're disqualified for approving it. That's the point.
So it's only that you should not approve your own Datacap request.
Yeah, it's not like your own. If you work with other SPs on it, so you shouldn't. It's like not like you shouldn't. It would be better to be trustworthy in that way, like just self-avoid this kind of situation.
But sealing is okay, but yeah. No, it's still not clear to me then. I'm sorry, perhaps somebody else can explain it better. I will just wait the other comments.
Yeah, actually, I just want to clarify one thing, Carolina. So is this for LDNs and direct allocations, or just one of those two?
I think for LDNs, like direct allocations is fine with me because there's no data abuse because of the amount.
So then, just to repeat this back to you, what you're saying is, in the LDN process, because anybody's on that multisig, if data is being stored with an SP that you are affiliated with, you should not be a notary that signs on that multisig. Like, does not sign any approvals for tranches, correct?
Yeah, in short, like in one project, you can only play like a single role here. You can't be like both.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I have some thoughts on that, but I think Danny has a hand and Greg has a hand, so let's do those first. Danny.
I like the direction that this is going in. I wonder if, so when K-Ray introduced it, it seemed to be more about disclosure. And I would like that as sort of, at very least, a first step, right? I think that's an expectation we have, actually, that if you do have a relationship with the project that you're either supporting or promoting, then you would notify that. But I would like that to be a firmer rule. I think it's sort of. I think it's hard to define the parameters of when we should prohibit. So maybe we should start with disclosure, so we get an idea of the problem, and also then it becomes easier to kind of punish that rather than kind of argue about where the line should be. That's it.
Greg or Carolina, if you've got thoughts on that.
Did you want me to go?
Yeah,
Or-
go ahead.
Yeah, I go for it. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks. Hey, this is Greg with Seal. I've always, just in the back of my mind, have always thought of an SP also being a notary approving Datacap, where they're now storing that data. I've always seen that as a conflict of interest. Definitely, it's almost like you're on both sides of the table. I would use the analogy when I was in the IP office at Berkeley Lab, right? I was selling license deals to companies. I couldn't also be on their side of the table taking equity from that company if I thought it was a good idea. So I do see some conflict here. And also what I would say is, like, what's the long-term vision of how notaries approve these things? Is it always going to be like, when we have a deal, we reach out to certain notaries and we talk to them and we do KYC and things, but is the future of notaries like, it's this like governing board where an application goes into the board and they figure out how to review it and then they spit out an answer, as opposed to like, you know, kind of, I don't say cherry picking, but like, you know, working with the same people all the time, you know? So I guess maybe this is, what's the long-term vision for the notaries and how they approve these things? And is it always going to be like this, or is it going to change? And maybe that's more of a, I guess, a much larger question, but I think that's important to this discussion. I'm complete.
Why you still have a hand? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm sorry. I put it away. I was driving.
No worries at all. I think for me, the way, like, I generally, like, really, I agree with the sentiment of this. I think it makes a lot of sense to think about it. I think the main thing that I've struggled with on this topic over the years has basically been that it's extremely challenging to do this correctly. And the reason I say that is because, you know, even if we did this, Carol, and we had a bunch of people that were like, yep, I can't sign this, that's just one tier of like validation that, hey, like, yes, indeed, like, you're not going to fake it or lie about who you are, etc. It's still really, really easy for somebody at that point to go and continue to make deals under the table, or like change their understanding of how they're working with things. Like, it's a very simple path to abuse that system, and it doesn't require that much effort. And that's the main concern I have, is that, like, ultimately, while this is useful, it's really hard to implement. Like, just even with getting notaries to correctly disclose the SPs that they work with today, we run into so many challenges. This is going to add another layer of complexity where this stuff will just happen under the table in a way. And so my general stance on this when we were launching LDN changed from basically this to then saying, okay, because it's so hard to transparently police this, let's instead just double down on the Datacap distribution across SPs. And that way, even if there are links, then there's some way to say, oh, like, you know, it's they're still distributed across SPs. And then there we have now the new challenge, which is how do you identify when SPs have relationships to each other, and like what is happening behind the table on, like, oh, like, these are actually the same people, just under different company names or different under different hoods. And so that's where now we're building a new level of rigor on, like, well, are they in different data centers? Are they in different locations? How do we prove that? Can we see what the data center looks like? Can we use the peer ID to make assumptions on their footprint physically, and then use on-chain statistics to make assumptions on their actual presence in the network? And so these are all, like, I think the philosophy is correct. I'm struggling to see how we implement. Faye?
Yeah, I think first of all, the self-dealing should continue to be disallowed. But for this disclosure, I think disclosure is fine. However, because we are such a small community, and most of the notaries are also SPs, if you, like, 10 notaries sign this application and you disallow them to seal any of the data in the application, that will discourage the notary to perform any work at all. yeah, that's my point. Like it's very hard to not bumping into each other in this community.
I think it might just be you, Danny, for the chat. Alessandro and then Carolina.
Yeah, so this is where I think the building a platform will actually be part of that next step, because then you don't only track the notaries and the allocation. You actually can start tracking clients. So from the platform, you select the client and you allocate Datacap to that client, and then you have a way of controlling that type of relationship. The thing is that right now we can actually control and know to which entity that Datacap went to, because you can change just a single letter on the name of a storage provider or a notary, and then you just lose track of it. So this is where I think we need a platform to hold all of those transactions. And I actually think that Filecoin has some type of, I don't know if it's ready yet, but they have some type of payment channels and that kind of mechanisms within the Filecoin. I don't know if it's ready yet, but we can maybe contact the technical team there to see if that's ready for implementation. Then we can that's more to being more like a long term, but then we can use that payment channel and select entities by a fixed name or string or whatever. Because right now we don't have a way to actually track that. So even if it's a good proposal, and even if it's a good way of handling things, we won't be able to do this. At least I don't see we doing this right now. We already have to deal with a lot of complexities, and we don't have enough resources on the software side to track and analyze that. So that's where I think we gotta think more into how to build a platform to hold those information and start having a more structured way of handling transactions and clients and notaries and storage providers and all of that within a platform. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Cool. I think I'm going to hand it back to Carolina, and then let's take the conversation to GitHub.
Okay, I will keep it short. So about the concern Yin-Fei raised, I think I do agree with him. Here is a small community. Everyone knows everyone. A lot of SPs, they're engaging as notaries as well. But I don't know how the revenue gonna be. But if I'm the notary plus SP, if I decide to sell this, data set, I would actually send the data sample to other notaries to verify it and actually grant DC to me. I don't think that's a big problem in this, as long as the data set is, legit. So yeah, that's my point.
Should just be what you're claiming is basically should just be able to identify and prove that to other notaries. You shouldn't need the same set that are making deals, and that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take the conversation to GitHub. I think there's a lot of points that were raised, both around challenges with implementation and incentives that this would create. I think the general feeling is that people agree with the philosophy. So that's great. I think that's not that surprising, but let's figure out what that actually means and whether or not it's feasible. So yeah, I'm going to recommend we keep moving with the agenda for now. Thank you. Carrie, I think we're heading into the topic on FIPs now, which is on me as well.
FIPs is up whenever you're ready.
Okay, let's do it. I don't see the slides up in my mind, but I can start chat. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. So for those of you that have been following along, there's two FIPs that I think have become relatively interesting discussion topics, a lot of attention over the last 3 weeks or so. Highly recommend that you all check them out. They will have significant implications to Filecoin Plus and the Filecoin Plus community. So please check them out and let's discuss what they mean for you. And so, I guess I made a couple of changes, but I need you to refresh the slide at some point, Kerry, for them to come. Maybe they'll show up. Nope, maybe something happened on mine. No worries, not critical. I'll talk to them anyway. So basically, on the first one, I'll actually talk about the first one here on the slide first, which is decoupling Filecoin Plus from storage marketplace. The goal here is to decouple the dependency between the current storage market actor and the way in which adjusted power influences rewards for storage providers. And so there's differences in effectively how the actual subsidies doled out for. So if you're a storage provider today, you're looking at quality adjusted power as a modifier to your expected value over time from block rewards. This actually changes the way in which those block rewards will be distributed for people that have quality adjusted power to not be just based on like block rewards, but a more consistent payout schedule, which is a good thing. But along with this, there's also a lot of suggestions in the FIP around how we should change the mechanism for the way in which Datacap flows from a client to a storage provider. So specifically, not needing the construct of a deal or a storage deal via the existing actor as a dependency, but instead using a different term and a different concept on chain. Yeah, I think, Kerry, don't worry. I think it's on my side. My change upload may have failed or something because I made a couple of changes, but they were definitely before you pulled out the deck. So it just hasn't propagated correctly from me. So no sweat, we'll figure it out for the afternoon session. But yeah, just so you guys are aware, definitely check it out because it effectively results in the creation of an allocation construct where a client says that they're going to spend Datacap on a piece of data with a specific provider. And so this has some advantages in terms of that tuple becoming unique and also ensuring that Datacap spend is commensurate with the actual data stored as opposed to just the size of the deal or the size of the sector. But it also has some trade-offs with regards to safety and how like quickly the system can move and the tooling that can be built around it. So please check that out if you're interested. Specifically calling it out for SPs, notaries, and clients. So and of course community members. So everybody in this call should take a look at the link for that one. And then the second conversation is around sector duration multipliers. So that's more. Actually, I'm going to paste some links to this as well, so you guys are aware in a second. But that one is around the construct of finding a way to incentivize deal making for longer effectively on the network. And so the challenge here is effectively the recommendation is linearly scale both the collateral and the rewards for sector based on how long it's sealed. Thank you, Kerry, for dropping the links in chat. This means that for like a deal that theoretically could exist for 5 years, we'd have 5 times the amount of collateral upfront. And then the expected quality adjusted power would also be 5x. So instead of it just being a 10x multiplier, it would be like a 50x. That was the original proposal. I think those parameters are now being changed to become lower, but they're still linearly scaling. And so anybody in here also, but especially calling out to the SPs, this one. So if you're listening to this and you're an SP, I would highly recommend you check this out because it will affect your economics and it will affect your ROI over time. And in some cases, I think it will make it better, but in some cases it may not. So please engage with this and share your honest thoughts in the discussion when you get a chance. If you have any immediate questions about this, let me know. If not, I think it's best to talk about this stuff directly in the GitHub topics because there's a lot of people involved in these conversations that are not in the like active members of this call or active members of the Fil Plus community. And so, yeah, please check them out and share your thoughts. There we go. Thank you, Kerry. That worked. I don't know what magic you just did, but yeah, these are the two. Cool. I see no concerns or reactions. I think we should keep going.
All right. We are at 15 minutes remaining on the call. This is a good chance for anything that you wanted to flag from the community, from the notaries, from the storage providers. We have no LDN applications to discuss. So I'll post this link right here just one more time if you were late. But turning the floor over, if there's anything on your mind, raise a hand and the floor is yours.
I see a couple of hands. Sal, want to go for it?
Yeah, certainly. And can I share here as well? Just want to see if I can do that.
Yeah, you should be able to.
You cannot share screen while other participants sharing.
Yeah, if I turn off, how much time do you think you want to show the screen?
I need all of maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute at the most.
All right, floor is yours.
All right, appreciate that. Let me just throw that on here. Hit share here. Okay. And now I'm trying to get over to the top and I can't do that. Let me move this out of the way. And all right, here we go. I think we should be able to see that. All right, so we've got an issue here with regards to our C-Link. So if you look at application 326 and 327 for Project Bearded, it was a total of 6.9 petabytes of data cap, and we require a data cap or an increase of the data cap for application 327. And by the way, I'm Sal, guys, from Seal Storage here in North America. Just to introduce myself. So we require an increase for that application to 3.1, thus making it an entire 10 petabyte data cap for both 326 and 327. So the reason why, so there is a technical reason for this increase, and it pretty much boils down to the fact that we are using 16 gigabyte sector sizes in order to seal the data. And when we do that, we cannot fit all the data into that 16 gigabytes. So what essentially happens where it would fill into a 32 gigabyte sector, and this is just sort of a high level diagram, so it kind of makes sense as to what we're talking about here. But when we put that into a 16 gig sector, we end up with this white space because it doesn't fill up the entire sector itself. So there's no actual data in that white space, but that is counting towards our data cap. So what's essentially happening is that we're under provisioned in a sense. So we require this further increase in data cap. I've asked the notaries to approve this, and the notaries have asked us to bring this to the table just so there's some everyone's aware of what's going on. And my understanding also is that we also saw this issue during Slingshot as well. So it's not something that should be new to the community in a sense. We've had these technical issues before, but I just certainly wanted to bring this up with regards to LDN 327. Okay, great. Any questions?
I think this is reflected in a general gap today that exists in the way data cap is calculated. And like this is something that would be covered by the latest FIP as well, where instead of it just being the actual size of the data, it's like the size of the inflated piece along with like what fills up the sector. And so in general, I think that as a community, we should also think about how we want to calculate data cap utilization and what that means. I think the risk here is also it creates a disincentive for people to, it creates an incentive for people to inflate data, which is not a good thing from like a pure like EV or reward standpoint long term. Like thus just leaving it in the hands of the client to ensure that the preparation is being done correctly. And so it would be really great if you guys could also share like what you're doing differently in your preparation in the future to ensure that that overflow doesn't happen, and like the actual deals are like efficient or effectively packing into sectors. I'm assuming Sal or Jacques, you already have a response for that, so it'd be good to share.
That sounds like a Jacques question.
Yeah, there's certainly some additional technical details we can provide on that. But yeah, I mean at high levels, simplistically, data cap is allocated against the entire sector, regardless of how much data is inside it. And We're doing 16, and for the most part, we can get two 16 gig car files into the same sector, but now and again, there's one that's slightly bigger, and then we can't get the second one in there, and then we end up with like half a sector is empty. So in our current work case, it's about a third of the sectors that end up with roughly half white space. And we didn't realize like Datacap is allocated against the entire sector. Kind of just realized that late after all the car files was generated. But yeah, kind of as an exercise, I did go back and look at like some of the slingshot restore stuff we did earlier in the year, and I saw exactly the same behavior. And I said, okay, well, it's not just us; it's kind of how it works. So yeah, there's probably improvement needs to be done on how Datacap is allocated against the entire sector.
Yeah, for that, what are you using as software to pack your data at this moment?
Yeah, we're using the standard graph split program, and kind of why we ended up doing 16 gig sectors or car files in the first place is the data set we're working on has 40 million files in it. And we kind of found that, when we tried to push for a 31 gigabyte car file using so many millions of small files, the process kind of crashed quite frequently. And we just kind of logically figured that, well, let's do half the size, and that worked reliably. Not realizing that if we go slightly over 16, it's actually going to have this this consequence. So that's kind of how we all ended up in the scenario.
Yeah, clear. Then I know where you're coming from.
Nice. On this issue, I think we have a hand from Alex, and then we have one more issue, and we'll give you the time, Dean. So Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, so what are you guys suggesting then to, did you already create a new request for Datacap, or is it something that Galen suggested, I guess, the last meeting about like editing the already requested Datacap? So did you create a new Datacap request, or are you looking to change the existing one?
Hey, Alexander. So we dropped a link into the chat there for 327. I think it's still to be determined. The idea was to bring this forward to the community here, to the Notary community, ensure that there's no disagreements or anything with what we're proposing, and then work out the next steps with Filecoin Foundation. So I think that's still to be determined as to creating a new LDN, or if we just expand on what we have.
I don't know. My guess would be that just creating a new request would be like the right way, at least from my point of view, and will probably be faster than trying to like change how the process works. So I don't know. I would just go for a new LDN, but that's me.
Nice. Carrying forward, we had 2 requests come through. I think we have time for one more, and that's coming from Dean. So this is application 497. I'm going to link it into the chat for everybody. And RG, I think that you were on this one for some input. So we have them to kind of answer some questions. Dean, the floor is yours.
Okay. I need a screen share, please. Thank you.
Should be all set. And just for mindful of time, we have about maybe 2-3 minutes tops.
Okay. And hello, everyone. Thanks to the Filecoin official for giving us this opportunity to speak in this meeting. As the company's chief strategy officer, I'm honored to be here to talk F3. Cisco is my colleague who works as engineer in F3 hash. F3 is coming to becoming a platform for computing power and NFT transactions. So, please allow me to introduce a brief PDF which enables you to know more details about F3. And first, I introduce Filecoin. It's very easy. Everybody knows it. Filecoin utilizes ipfs technology, one of the top and fastest developing data storage protocol with highest market cap. After that, the fast development of it we know, and then Filecoin embrace the UAM where we are coming. Everybody nodes. Finally, the Filecoin's network features stable global ecology. That's I want mentioned. And so, what do we do? Well, what about F3 hash? F3 hash is established in Singapore in 2021. It is provided with a range of services focused on NFT market, which includes common memo, NFT hash, per NFT, DeFi NFT platform with technical background and experienced management team. It's our mission to build a global NFT plus Filecoin Web3 infrastructure. And about the team, we have a lot of teams, all are younger. The average age is not more than 30 years old, and we have a lot of experience in blockchain and cloud storage colleges. After that, talk about business service. HashPro NFT trading platform is independently and decentralized HashPro trading platform. F3 aims to provide global users with most stable cloud computing power and user-friendly, free function trading platform and based on NFT. F3 HashPro and great card. You can see it. Maybe you can scan it on f3hash.com. Okay. In here, I want to mention that F3 have cooperated with banners and Huobi. For instance, we are the only one in this industry who has cooperated with the two top exchange company.
Hey, Dean, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Okay. I will be hurry. Okay.
I'm going to stop the sharing on your side. And then RG, I see that you've got a hand up. RG, once Dean stops sharing, maybe you could ask your question.
Yeah, we just are short on time. So, Dean, I think one of the things that, so you mentioned that, the company was established in 2021. And I think the biggest concern here is the amount of requests. I'm just looking at the application again, and you requested 5 PIBs of data. And so we're just not sure, right? I think the number of followers is great, but I mean, the more we look on the website, it's very hard to find out the exact size of data set. So I think that's the biggest concern. I think the service is great and we're excited about it. But that's my concern personally. So if you could shed more light on like exactly how do you what is the actual amount of data that you have, and the number of copies and SP distribution. I think those are the concerns right now.
I got it. I very express only 1 minute. I just want to say that there are 5 components about the days. First is client days. We have over 10,000 clients who have purchased NFT on our platform. Every purchase will have the prices, time, quantity, and the address of the wallet. The second is the designing date. The third is the product date. The last is our middle date, and the social date. So the details and actually taste, I just wanted to express to you, please.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think I'll definitely pose more questions if I have any in the issue, but I'll just give the community maybe like a minute if you have any questions based on the presentation. You can also, I'll just post the issue as well so that all the community members can go and look at the issue.
Okay, I got it. Thanks.
Awesome. But I know we're short on time, so I just want to give the floor back to Kevin to make sure we are able to cover anything.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. Thanks for bringing that up. We'll take that offline. Thanks, RG. I think the last thing that I would just flag for the community while sharing is that if you are keen to get anything onto the agenda for these meetings, just as a quick refresh on this, if you come to the Notary governance repo inside of GitHub, after each call, I'll set up like, hey, here's the next call. It's coming up ahead of time. If you click on that link, just say like, hey, I'd like 5 minutes to present and come through here. To the last 2 presenters, happy that the time worked out that we get you. All I'd ask is that if you do it deadline by like the day or so before the call, that way when we're finalizing the agenda, the time, we know what to work in. If it comes through last minute, it might not always get through. So I appreciate your guys' flexibility. Worked out really well this call, so I'm happy that worked. We are right at the 60-second. RG Deep, I'll give you any kind of closing thoughts if there was anything on your mind.
No, I think the one thing that I did flag this in the group, but I would really encourage all the community members to also add any comments that you usually post in Slack to the GitHub as well. I think it just really helps us as the governance team to track things and also make sure that everyone's voice is heard, because not everyone is in Slack, but GitHub is kind of where we want to make sure things exist. So if even if it's copy paste, please make sure that the discussion is there, so that we don't miss it.
All right, with that, thank you, everybody. As a quick reminder, the call taking place, the second part today is going to be 6 p.m. Pacific time, 0100 UTC and 0900. So thank you for filling out that poll. We'll post that ahead of time, and we'll see you all on the next call later. All right, well, big friendly, good evening, good morning. We are kicking off the second Notary governance call for, goodness, August 23rd, 2022. Let's take a look. Typically, when we run these calls, it looks like we don't have a lot of new people and a lot of very familiar faces, but we usually have 4 segments to the call. The first is just kind of housekeeping logistics, where we kind of check in. The second is metrics, which we are going to omit this week for time. So we're sending the slide decks to the Fil Plus channel in Slack if you want to grab those numbers or take a look. The bullet points are there wasn't a lot of changes, so we're going to save time for more discussions. Those discussions will come in the community issues, and then we're going to save time at the end for anything that you might want to flag on this call. So with that, let's take a quick look at the governance team. So Deep, Galen, myself, and RG, we are your governance team, and we're just kind of here to make sure that you have a support for any leg that you see. We're all on the call except for Galen. Galen's going to be out of the office this week, so if you send him a Slack or an email or ping him on GitHub, just a friendly reminder that he'll be back in next Wednesday. So if you need anything immediate, please ping the 3 of us that are still here, and we'll be happy to back you up with whatever you need. If you're on the call right now, what makes it really helpful is if we haven't talked to you before, just having a name that we could respond to. So you can see, like, you could right click and change it. That just means we're not saying like, hey, Zoom user 123, and we can kind of link it back. So just a quick thing, if you wouldn't mind doing it, makes the conversation just a little bit nicer as we go through it. And then I'm going to race to see who can get this posted into chat. And this is just the sign up sheet for Airtable. If you happen to not sign in the morning, Alex, you could take this one right here and just mark that, hey, fill it out once for the afternoon session and once for the morning. And what we do is we take this for the SLA for you notaries, and then any kind of governance comms that might come up in the future. So if you'd like to just mark down that you were here, this is a really quick and easy way to just put that participation in. And that way we can see who is on the call as we go through. So with that, we have a pretty full agenda, and here's kind of what we're going to be talking about at a very high level. We are going to be having an update on the Fil Enterprise. Meg, I kind of briefed this in the morning. Maybe I could queue you up, or we didn't really talk too much, so I'll be happy to kind of hand the floor over for anything that you might want to share on this. And I have the talking points from Kev. The second point is RG is going to walk us through a Trust and Enterprise update, just kind of some summary of what we're going on, more of a presentation. And then we have a quick summary from Deep about the outage that was in the registry that happened last weekend. What's going on? What's the status? Then the next 3 points on the agenda, they're meant to be more of discussion. So rather than us just updating you, we're looking to kind of share this and get your feedback from the community. So the first is the final time we're going to be talking and getting feedback around the LDN template modification. That's issue 593. The second is the modification for increasing the amount of data cap that comes through. So talking about what those limits are, does this make sense? Just kind of getting your last input on those issues. And 602, this was a new one that got flagged just a couple days ago. And this kind of talks about the diligence and self-reporting discovery between storage providers and notaries. After that discussion, Deep's going to walk us through a couple of the 2 major FIPs that are in the proposal. These are more just to make sure that these are on your horizon and you're looking at them and getting a feel for it. James and Chad will kind of get to that check-in on the time frames. Thank you for flagging that as we go through it. So with that, let's take a look. So Meg, maybe what I'll do is I'll just kind of brief this, and I'll turn the floor over for you. Thumbs up if there's nothing more to add, and then I'll kind of give you the floor if there's anything you wanted to provide additional clarification on. So Fil Enterprise, the working group is kicked off. There is a channel in Slack if you were keen to get more information on it, and that channel is Fil Enterprise Working Group. It's a public channel. You don't need an invite. Feel free to go grab it. The link is in the slide deck, and this slide deck is posted in the Fil channel on Slack. The big call outs for this right now is that 25 storage providers have signed up to join the pilot working group. They've begun meeting and collecting feedback and started some working projects as they go through. Kevin Z at Protocol Labs is the DRI running that program. And so essentially, if you have any questions or comments or want to get more input, pinging this Slack message will be a great way to reach out to Kevin Z. And what he's doing right now is he's reaching out for feedback and collecting that information for what's going into that pilot. They hold regular working group calls, and those calls are currently looked at like, what are the approval requirements that go into notaries? So some of you that have been with the program for a while, you're very familiar with what you may ask in an application in order to suss out the sus. Any kind of newer notaries that are joined on board, they're kind of looking at how can we make that process a little bit better. And as we talk about this call, we get into the applications, we'll kind of look at some things we're doing behind the scene. There are 5 big projects that are in this working group right now. And I'm not going to open the links up, but if you wanted to open these links up and see for yourself or get involved, these will each take you to a GitHub repository. So what they're looking at is there a lead storage provider that they can take and kind of look at that model as it goes forward, and we can kind of get more information on that GitHub issue. How do we make that client data cap allocation as smooth as process, make that as clean and effective? And as we talk about those metrics, drive that to be an easier setup. And then the details of the application, we're going to talk about this on that call, is how do we modify the application so we're collecting as much information right off the bat, so you as notaries aren't always having to continually ping and ask the same questions over and over again. How do we kind of get that in a place where it's more automated so it's really an easier for you process? The SLAs, just like with this call, we're recording time, participation, activity in the network. How do we standardize that and make it like as simplified and transparent as possible? And then lastly, what are the KYCs? Like, how do we know the customers? What are the expectations that go along with that? So obviously, these are very meaty, big, beefy at the heart of the whole Filecoin Plus program. And so these are really unwrapped with it. So again, if you were curious to dive into any one of these, this link is in the slide deck, which is in Slack. You could open up these GitHub issues and reply back. With that, I'm going to turn it over. Meg, is there anything that you'd like to add from your unique place, kind of kicking off this proposal to add to this?
Kevin, I think you've nailed it. That's the status update at the moment. In that working group channel, like, I guess the call to action from Kevin is like, just get involved. I can see lots of great comments, both in the Slack channel and in some of the issues. And I think Kevin's next steps are to lead some discussions around these. They sort of need a little bit of ideation, working them through till we've got like a position on each of them.
Thank you.
That's the status of the matter.
Sweet. We kind of propose this to be more of an update, but since we have a little bit of time in the schedule, does anybody have any questions for Meg or anybody participating in the Fil Enterprise?
I have one thing that I wanted to just flag. Meg, in terms of terminology, there's a couple of terms that I think are going to be relatively new for the community. So a good example of this is like differentiating between KYC and KYB. It's something that I learned 2 weeks ago, thanks to KZ and your work. And so those of you that, are like wanting to monitor the work, but maybe not even like actively participate, or think that it might have any kind of implication on like your future work, either as business development for Filecoin or as large scale SPs that are interested, or obviously in your responsibilities as a notary, I would say start reading this stuff. Even if you're not ready to actively contribute to it, just keep an eye out. Like, there's a lot to learn there. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to continue to iterate and evolve. And I think everybody will be surprised by how interesting of a challenge this is. And so please give it some due respect, make some space for it. And like, absolutely here calling out notaries in the space. Like, this is cool stuff. This is part of what you signed up for. Looking forward to seeing your engagement.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, the big challenge for all of us is how do we balance trust and privacy? They're in conflict. And so that underpins all of these discussions. So great ideas on how we do that are always welcome.
Well said.
Cool.
Thank you as always,
I-
Mike. Appreciate that.
I think you can carry on.
All right. RG, my friend, would you like to take this one?
Yeah. So I have two updates on the trust and transparency front. I posted these in the Fil Plus channel and a couple of other channels, but just wanted to flag them again here. We've seen increased attempts by applicants that are trying to scrape websites of legitimate organizations or applications that have been successful in the past. So this is just, I guess, a flag for clients or SPs who work with clients to just, scan the list of existing issues. You can just select the label bot looking good, or even, just even without that, and just see if there are any applications that sound that seem to like be copying certain information of a client that you might have worked with. I think there are two reasons for this. One is we're looking into risk scores, and we don't want any client to be impacted for no fault of their own, as well as we want to make sure that the community is aware of this issue. So I think that's the first one. And the second one, I think someone today on the call asked in the group the requirement for KYB for business licenses. And I wanted to kind of make it clear that the governance team is only asking for those business licenses in a case where it's very hard for us to determine the relationship between the applicant and the organization. So again, if you're a client or you're an SP working with a client, please kind of encourage and make sure that you can be as clear as possible about who the applicant is and what the relationship is with the organization. Otherwise, we are kind of forced to ask for more evidence. So those are two kind of main items on the trust and transparency front today.
We kind of propose this to be like just an update, but since we have time on the call in a group, does anybody have any questions on this before we go on?
Not a question, but confirmation. So this is like what I saw where Winnan put in a data set and then someone else pretending to be Winnan put in a data set. And then that was a fraudulent application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think in that case, they were the ones like kind of pointing it out because, I noticed that the organization was like their organization. So I just tagged them on GitHub. And I think that was one way. And then they just, went ahead and just to make sure there aren't others. And they actually did find a few others. So I think that was a great, because I think one of the good things about showing up at these governance calls is, you're also earning trust in this manner. And so we know clients who are around. And so, we can keep some sort of track. And if something comes up, for the governance team, we can flag that. So I think that is kind of what we do on our side, but it would be great to get your support as well.
I think I have a question. Is this, you mentioned scoring, like doing some type of scoring there.
Yeah.
Is this already in place, working, and like, and if so, is this where is this information like being stored right now? Is it internal or?
Yeah, so we are in the very early stages of creating a spec document and trying to work and find teams to work with. I think for us, we want to make sure that we can outline the requirements before we put it out on a governance call in the community. There is some teams that we have kind of narrowed down who can help us with developing such a risk scores. But I think my goal is over the next month, bring this to the community and present some of the initial thinking that I've been doing since I joined the team.
But this is not currently like functioning as of right now, is it?
No, but I think but we will be using this historical data, right, to feed into that. And so any activity that happens today will eventually be impacted, will eventually impact the score in the, whatever that score, whenever it comes out. And so that's why I wanted to flag this, that, it does not negatively impact certain clients who are high trust.
Sure, thanks.
Deep, do you want to take this one, bud?
Yeah. So some of you noted in Slack over the last couple of days that there was an outage on the app. Thank you so much for helping us report this and figure out what was happening. Basically, it turned out that the underlying nodes did an update in terms of how we do access. So as some of you already know, we actually use like chain access as a service as opposed to hosting our own full nodes for the app in the back end. And so there was an update on their end where effectively the bearer token processing broke. And so requests being made to the chain weren't working. And so direct allocations weren't working, as well as chain reads weren't working. So we were seeing a bunch of like loading errors and stuff. We got that figured out. It was a simple change in the headers of the website. And we're now working on a better longer term design. So there will probably be another outage for maybe 12 hours or so at some point in the coming weeks once we get that sorted. But just as an update, everything should be fully functional now on the registry app. Everything should be working. You should be able to log in and sign messages as usual if you're a notary. And so if anybody still hits issues with this, please let us know, because it'd be really important to catch this and figure out if there's anything else that we missed. Thank you.
So yeah, I can take this one. So there are two open issues that we wanted to flag today. The first one is about updating the template for LDN applications, specifically LDN exceptions. So these are data sets that are either encrypted or private, and that that would eventually be part of eFil, but for the time being they're not. And so the request here is to gather more data, and so you can go check out the issue. I think we'll post. Deep just posted that in the chat. And just make comments. I think we haven't seen much engagement so far. So if we don't see other engagement in the next week or so, we might close this. And so it'd be really great to get your feedback on this one. And the next issue that we wanted to discuss is about increasing the limit of Datacap. So just some context. Today, the limit that a client can apply is 5 PIPs for an LDN application. The proposal is to increase that to 25. The link is in the chat again. There have been some concerns around increased potential for abuse of Datacap, which is valid. There's a healthy amount of discussion on the issue. So please go check that out and contribute to that. My own personal opinion is that there's a lot of inefficiencies today that will be ironed out. There are certain clients who have legitimate data that they are looking to onboard, and it just creates more kind of backlog for them to create multiple applications, go through the verification process again and again. Today we're getting, over the past couple of weeks since I've been observing, we're getting on average 20 new LDN applications. And so this number is likely to increase over the next couple of months as the network grows. And so this proposal is also in that direction to support that. But again, I would love any feedback, any concerns. Please make sure to post on GitHub.
Just to follow up something I said this morning to RG, I think there was a comment from Bobby in the issue itself, and there's some conversation in Slack as well. One of the takeaways I had, and I shared this in the morning call, so I'm sharing it now as well, so you all can see it and hear it live, is that I think the biggest risk of this change is effectively that the initial allocation amounts are going to go up drastically. And so I'm considering suggesting an additional change with this change, which is that we also adjust the upper limits of like the initial allocations of tranches of Datacap, because this would effectively allow a client to go from getting, like 50 TIBs or 100 TIBs the first time to like 250 or 500. And so maybe it's good to add like upper bounds initially as well. Just because, the moment we set it to 5, we got a ton of applications where people are like, oh, I have 5 petabytes of data to store. And it's like, here are my text files. And it's like, there's no way you have like 1 petabyte of text files to upload, right? And so my guess is if you up this 25, we're going to get a bunch of applications that are 25. And so just to maintain that level of sort of safety and sanity and give notaries a chance to react sooner, I think it makes sense to pair this hand in hand with a constraint on the LDN initial tranches. So I have some ideas in my head. I'll be following up in the GitHub issue later today and tomorrow. So those of you that have similar thoughts, different thoughts, want to agree or disagree, I'd love to see you in GitHub. Thank you, RG, for facilitating. There's a hand from Alessandro.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand it because we're trying to if we raise the limit from 5 to 25, I guess that's the proposal, right? From 5 to 25, yeah. So do we have any current like use case for that much data cap? Like do we have any client or anyone using that much data cap? And if so, for how long we've been having like this large clients for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can take the first stab at it. So I did post for an example in the issue. I believe it's issue 483, but then there's other issues that are open. So you can see, I think on page 6 or 7, there's some issues that are pending for different reasons, but also for just the amount of data cap. So like multiple applications by the same client. And I think like recently, for example, we had a client that was requesting 7.5 PIPs of data cap, which was, on the lower end, but this is the first time they're trying it out. And we have done like the KYC, they've provided all the documentation. And so I think the trends that what we're seeing, both in the open issues, as well as like just like expression of interest that we see at events and at in-person engagements. Those are some of the reasons why we're also pushing for, or one of the reasons we came up with this proposal in the first place.
Just to add to that, Alex, this is something that actually came up in last November. We got a bunch of feedback from SPs that were trying to do substantive amount of business development, especially in North America and Europe. So there was some feedback. I think actually if you look in the Notary governance repo, like there's a discussion topic from Galen like December or something of last year. And we decided to table it at that point in time because it just felt really like unsafe and very difficult to scale back if anything went wrong. Where we are today with the LDN v3 design, this is a lot easier to track and ensure that like the amount of data cap doesn't get completely out of hand, because effectively one of the upsides of the v3 design is that the total amount of data cap in circulation is much lower than what we previously had, where you just don't need that much buffer because we were able to create it on the fly just for that one like tap. And what we're seeing is pretty like consistently starting from March, April of this year, like applications coming in that are like 2 applications or 3 applications, and in some case, like 10 or 12. And so this is more about just saying, hey, now that we can afford to do this a little bit more safely, what is the safe way to continue increasing these upper bounds? And then the other reason I think this is really helpful and why the timing for this is relevant today is because we're about to double down on how we serve enterprise data. And one of the things that we've heard is around enterprise customers needing confidence. So there's a runway for them and there's a pathway for them. And so creating space for that, like, hey, like you're a company that has a bunch of video files, like say you got a petabyte and a half, like we should be able to do that for you without interruption. And when you have multiple LDNs, there's interruption because there's like additional overhead, there's processing, there's like resetting of the tranches or manual processing to ensure that the tranches don't drop. And so it feels like not as unsafe as long as we put the correct checks in place. And I think the correct checks at this point are effectively just, let's make sure that the initial tranches of the scaling of the tranches is not 5 times, because that would be bad. And so let's find a way to scale that down. So that initial thing that says, minimum of 5% or minimum of half of a week, maybe that parameter needs to change to make this feel safer. But from a total request standpoint and a total data cap in circulation standpoint, it's a little bit safer today, I think.
But is that the bottleneck we're having right now? Is the bottleneck being on the total data cap requested, or is it on like having those first tranches released and like getting the request approved and then getting the first tranches. Where is the bottleneck? Is it really on the total amount of Datacap requested, or on those other like releasing the first tranches and getting the actual request approved?
I think it depends on the application. Like there's applications that have been able to display, like prove that they're trustworthy or are able to get notary turnaround in like under 1 day or 2 days. And so in those cases, this is the bottleneck. In the cases where like they aren't able to establish that trust, then it's the other thing. And so I don't think these are mutually exclusive changes. I think we should. This to me feels more like we know that this is a bottleneck. In some cases, we are much more comfortable being able to make this change today because of all the other things that have changed in the architecture. May as well give it a shot. I think on average, we do need to spend more time around like overall tracking of TTD for the less trust or the harder to establish trust cases, though. So I agree with you that that is the priority. This just feels like relatively low-hanging fruit at this point to experiment with if we can do it safely.
I guess my worry would be kind of the same that you mentioned, that like as soon as you raise the limit, you just get more requests for that limit instead of actual needs. You just get spammed like requests for that. So I don't know if you had to, I don't know, think a way of having like some way of avoiding that.
I think it's a great question. I'm gonna let RG respond. I know he's done a lot of like I've seen you requested 5 peribytes. This doesn't make sense. Tell me why. So I'd be curious to hear his thoughts over the last week.
So I think there's like two things here, right? I think one is we've been playing defense for a long time, and I think if we really want to like go enterprise and like if you want to really play by what like all these initiatives that we are talking about, we need to like start playing a bit more on the attack side. And I think what that means is that like that's fine. I mean, I don't think it's like it depends on like we'll reach a point where we'll have the right amount of tooling to kind of open the floodgates, so to say. I think whenever we do it, that'll just happen, and that is just part of the process. And I think we need to learn from the process. I think over the past couple of months, I think we've learned a lot of what kind of problems exist. We're trying to track that, trying to understand like there's some patterns we're already starting to see in the way certain kind of fraud occurs. And so my approach there is that's fine, let it come. That does not mean that if that means that the type of data cap is going to increase, that's fine. We're gonna adjust those numbers and those expectations. But I think we're not gonna let this go out of our hands just because we've increased the amount of data cap. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it from a trust and transparency perspective.
Yeah, cool. I guess the last point I would have, just so we can think about it in the future. It doesn't have to be for this, but I think it's a risk adding more complexity and more like we'll just have more work to do adding this stuff. So I don't actually know that we can handle all the requests we're getting right now, at least for the moment we're in. I guess focusing more on getting that pipeline fixed, getting that like flow of tranches being released, requests being approved, and analyzed and whatnot. Focusing on that instead of just increasing the amount of work we would have to do, because once you add like more types of data cap or more amounts of data cap allocation, you just have more and more piles of work that we can even handle right now. So that's one worry that I would just leave it at that, so we can think about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alex, in the interest of time, I'm going to say let's take this to GitHub. I think you should mention this anyway. Like it's worth it. I know there's people in this room that have been impacted by this directly. Meg, James, a couple of others watching the recording. Please chime in as well. And like it is worth assessing whether or not it's worth the change. Let's have the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, D, we'll definitely go put comments into the discussions.
Yeah.
Thanks, James. I think I'll kick this one off and then I'll add it to Deep for a little bit more additional points. So this was a big topic in the morning, just if you're going to go back and watch this video. So essentially, this came through as a new proposal modification in the GitHub Notary governance. And essentially, at a very high level, what this is talking about is essentially like a self-disclosure for storage providers who may start working with notaries. And at a very high level, kind of how you think about it, like in business, is like if you're working with a lawyer, they might recuse themselves. They just might make it known, hey, there's no conflict of interest, or I'm just flagging this ahead of time that I have these existing relationships with these individuals. So what this proposal is going to start to kind of carve into, and where there was some conversation this morning is how that carves into, is how does that look? How are we asking storage providers to kind of like self-report their existing relationships with notaries or these interactions that may be having? So that's what this issue is trying to get to the heart of. It's relatively new, it was just flagged. And so this is kind of the initial proposal. And this is the first time as a community we're talking about it. So we're kind of opening the floor up to kind of hear your thoughts about this thought process overall, as well as some kind of tactical ways to approach that. And then Deep, if I could set you up to kind of add any kind of your thoughts or clarifications on it.
Thank you. So just one small correction. It's actually for notaries to do the disclosure rather than SPs. And then specifically, like Carrie said, like recuse themselves from LDN applications. So this wasn't mentioned in the issue, but Carolina, who was there in the morning call, specified that her intent was to share this for LDN applications. So tactically, what this means is if you're a notary, you're associated with a storage provider operation, there's an application for Datacap in the LDN process. You want to support that as a storage provider or an associated storage provider will be supporting that client, then as a notary, you should not be signing Datacap for that LDN application. The context today is that you technically still can, and that's because there are multiple notaries involved and it's an open due diligence process, but this is absolutely a no-no for the direct allocation path. The challenge that we've had today is that getting notaries to correctly disclose their relationships is extremely difficult. Like when you sign up to be a notary, we ask you to talk about the addresses you have on chain, and notaries often don't disclose all the addresses. And even if they do, relationships change and form over time. So it's just really, really hard to track, what's happening overall. And so this topic came up a lot. And now I'm going to stop talking from the perspective of the issue, and I'm going to give you my opinion a little bit to kick off the conversation. But this topic was extremely hot when we were talking about LDN in the first place. And I'm talking about like April 2021, where the first conversation started on like, hey, is it okay for a notary to be an SP, and is it okay for that notary to sign allocations? And initially we're like, oh, is that preventable? Would that be bad? And eventually I think the thing that we anchored on as a community is that it's really difficult to track. And what you end up doing by doing this is you basically still let the people that want to abuse the system, and the people that are trying to do the right thing are now disincentivized from doing the right thing. And so at that point in time, we made the decision to say, no, it's an open due diligence process. If you're a notary and an SP, we'd rather that you err on the side of disclosing, and we'd rather err on the side of tracking deal making on chain to make sure that the data cap is being distributed fairly, and let it be okay as long as the distribution is happening to like 4 SPs or 5 SPs, right? And so nobody's getting allocated 25-30% plus of that data cap. Now we're entering slightly trickier waters where like Enterprise Fil Plus is saying, okay, maybe it's okay for 2 replicas out of 5, so that's 40%. Now what happens if that organization is a notary as well while doing the BD? That's where I think it gets a little bit tricky. And so effectively tracking the stakeholder roles that an entity plays on an application is really difficult. And I think Carolina's point was you should be one. You should either be the client representative or an SP, or you should be a notary, and you shouldn't be both. And while the philosophy, I think, is a fair one, in practice, I think it's really, really hard to execute. And so I'd love to hear what people have to say on that. And then maybe for the sake of time, we keep this one to about 6 minutes. I know it's going to be a relatively controversial one, so I'll probably cut people off at about 4 or 5 minutes. Alex, please.
Yeah, so I don't think we, like I said, it's almost, unless we start building the software that onboards the data and handles everything about the client, the notaries, and the storage providers is almost impossible to really track that and build up like the relationships. We can do our best, but unless because the only way we can actually and even so there will be like hacking mechanisms to circumvent that, but the only way we could actually do something like this, it was if we had control of, for example, having a Lotus implementation of our own that actually handles like onboarding, receiving and handling all the Datacap, transferring that between entities and or not. And I don't actually think that's the vision of the program. I don't think that's actually feasible, at least not within like short to medium term. And I don't really think that would be maintainable, having such a complex and like huge system that controls it all. So I think we probably need to be more open about it, and like that's an open problem that we can't really solve, because you can just spin up a new address and that's it. So as much as this sounds like a good proposal, and I don't think it's feasible to really get to a point where we can track and control everything, every piece of this. So yeah, we should instead think of ways of like handling the bad actors and preventing from getting to a point where this becomes so the problem becomes so huge that it actually hurts the ecosystem. But if this is like, if this happens in like minor ways and whatnot, we can deal with it, finding other ways, but not controlling everything, because that's like, that would be really hard, and like really hard. I don't think we can do that for now, and I don't think that's the vision for the program at all.
Cool. Any other thoughts, comments on this? Alex, please also follow up in GitHub, because I don't know if Carolina is going to review the recording, given that she was there live in the morning. Thank you. Anyone else?
Another thing I have, unless someone else have anything else, is that you would also have to keep that updated, right? So you would have to like have a system so that you can automatically update every address you create and every storage provider you have a relationship. That's like, that wouldn't be so easy to do.
For what it's worth, I do think we do need some version of that, though. Like, we should have that, not because we need to block people, but because we need to make sure that conflicts of interest are covered for the direct allocation pipeline. I just think that right now, because there's just not that much data cap flowing through that pipeline, it's not as pressing, and it's not as lucrative of a source of abuse as other things might be. But yes, it is challenging. It's something we should eventually work towards. I think Alex, you're agreeing with me that the philosophy is correct. It's just really, really hard in practice, to the point where it's almost detrimental in practice.
Yeah,
James, I see you have a hand, so I'm going to have me and Alex stop talking because we've done the bulk of it so far.
I just want to say I just want to say that like, I am glad this is a discussion topic, because as a new notary, I've gotten mixed reviews from other notaries like, hey, I'm not supposed to sign this because I plan on storing it. And they're like, oh no, that's okay. And I'm like, that seems weird. So when you mentioned that, it was previously actually okay, that makes sense now. But I always thought that would be weird for a notary to approve Datacap and then seal it. It's kind of against what Fil Plus is about. But to what Alex's point is, yeah, this is all integrity right now. It's impossible to track, because you can just spin up a new SP ID and then oh, this is not Picnic.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I promise.
That's where I think
I'll go for it.
FVM will probably be we can probably do some of that when FVM actually gets to a point where we can build those programmable stuff. That's where we probably will be able to build something like that. But for now, I don't see.
Okay, I promise 7 minutes or 6 minute cutoff. I think we're at 5.5 or 6. So I'm going to say, let's take this to GitHub. Thank you both for sharing your thoughts.
Deep, would you mind this with Deep?
Just when you thought you were done hearing my voice. So I wanted to call out 2 FIPs that have become relatively hot topics over the last 3 weeks. I know many of you personally that are in these calls have been involved in these conversations. And so I wanted to thank you for your participation as community members, not just in Filecoin Plus, but at large Filecoin governance. Specifically, I want to highlight these because they have direct implications on program design, on safety, on viability of abuse, on the way in which Datacap gets issued and used. And so please, please, please check these out. They're very informative discussions and all of your inputs will be valuable. I'm going to give you my 30-second elevator pitch on both of them so you have some context, but I cannot compete with reading the discussions and the documents. There's a lot out there. And so it's going to take you half an hour, maybe more, to read through this. Please set that time aside, ideally this week if you're in this room or you're watching this recording, because if you're here and you're watching this recording, you probably care about it enough to check this out. And I see Alex nodding enthusiastically because I think he's read through these, so he understands where I'm coming from. So the first one is Proposal 36. This is around increasing the quality adjusted power cap from 10 to some new number with a multiplier. And that multiplier is dependent on the actual length of the sector commitment. So for example, if it's a 5-year deal, maybe there's a linear multiplier of 5x. And so Datacap plus a 5-year deal would be like 50x the standard power as opposed to 10x or 1x. I think they're changing the parameters, so it may not be 5x anymore, but there's some like linear scaling factor that they're looking at. So this would increase the collateral if you're an SP. This would also increase the expected value of the sector if you're an SP, but it would also make it harder for us to track down and negate the likelihood of long-term abuse or sectors with data that aren't useful on the network. But at the same time, it would reduce some client friction where, instead of needing to continue to renew deals and continue to get more data cap for those deals, you could just commit to letting a sector survive for much longer and do that once. And so please go check out that conversation, especially if you're also an SP, because it will impact the way you model out your revenue and you think about your expected value of the network. The second FIP topic here is on decoupling the Filecoin Plus model from storage market actors. So specifically, if you look at the way the subsidies paid out from the network, it's based on a multiplier on the block reward, right? Like you're effectively getting more lottery tickets for the same lottery. This basically says, hey, that isn't necessarily the best way to do it. Maybe we should have a separate math function that dishes out the reward consistently every epoch to every participant, which could help, especially for smaller SPs that are looking forward to getting into the game. But the recommendation also comes with a lot of changes to how Datacap actually functions. And I think there's lots of pros and cons there too. So please definitely check this out. Effectively, like TLDR on this is instead of waiting for Datacap to be spent in a deal, a client actually pre-allocates that Datacap for a future deal by saying that this CID will be stored with that provider ID, and that's when the Datacap gets expended. So it's like one step before what you're traditionally used to, giving the provider more time to go and seal it and get the data cap at that point in time. And so there are upsides to that. We can create much more efficient sealing pipelines, better use of capital, but there's trade-offs directly to clients as well, where the experience may not be as simplistic, or the decisions they're making and how they're expecting to onboard data might be impacted. And so those of you that are doing business development, understanding the client stakeholder a little bit better, and those of you thinking about abuse in the Fil Plus system, this introduces a new vector. And so please check out that conversation. Both of these are, like I said, very, very important, big changes, sweeping changes, and up for discussion for the next network upgrade. So this is like hot right now, like literally this week, next week is when you should get plugged into the conversation. And so just flagging. Meg, I see you have a hand.
Yeah, these are such long discussions. Can you give us a summary level where we are in it? Because I've been following them, but they're so
long.
maybe if you could just tell us where are we up to with 36 and 45, if you can.
Honestly, I'll do my best, but please take my caveat that, by the time, and those of you watching the recording, I have no idea what the conversations will be by the time you hear this. It's just flagging, but from my understanding, which is between 12 and 36 hours old at this point, depending on which one it is, the one for the sector duration multiplier, there's been a decent amount of pushback around like safety and transitioning of deals into the future. I think there's conversation happening on whether or not the multiplier should be linear versus not linear, and like what that multiplier actually is. So is it actually 5 times for 5 year, or is it like 2 times for 5 year, and then scaling it like decimal points, like on the way up? And so those are the open points. There's been a decent amount of pushback from the community around like how this would impact revenue models for smaller SPs, and how this would impact from a Fil availability and collateral standpoint, because if everybody starts sealing like much longer sectors, the amount of circulating Fil will decrease substantively, and lenders haven't necessarily been plugged in enough into the conversation yet, or have not committed to knowing whether or not they can actually support the SP demand that we would expect to see, or the Fil demand that we would expect to see. Personally, for me, I think some of the math underestimated the demand growth that we are forecasting. Like one of the parameters they had there was like 50% year-over-year growth in like verified deals on chain, and that's like frankly way off the mark. We're like 10,000% in the last year, and sure, like every year won't be 10,000, but I still expect like order of magnitude increases given how early we are in the ecosystem, and so I think that they need to do a little bit more math. There's some burden of proof there that they need to prove out with their math, but still, really hot topic. A lot of SPs in uproar from different regions. So yeah, that's on the first one. On the second one, the conversation is really about this FIP has a couple of different components, and they're all individually pretty complex. And so there's a subtle balance between what needs to be in the FIP versus what could come later. And so the idea is effectively FVM is coming. There will eventually be like a user programmable FVM. We want to enable people to write smart contracts that can run market actors individually. So like automating deal engines, for example, in a smart contract would require these kinds of FIPs to take place to then support verified deals at scale. I think the challenges there are effectively that the flow now looks something like, well, the notary part is the same. So a client goes and gets Datacap from notaries, but then they commit to putting that Datacap up for a deal. And so they're associating a piece of Datacap with a piece CID and a provider ID. It's almost like an NFT. Like you're almost like minting like an NFT Meg to say that I'm going to eventually get a deal done. It'll be verified, and this is what's going to be in it. So the upsides of that are, your Datacap is being used efficiently. Like today, there's like all these things around padding. You end up paying more than you actually needed to. You end up needing to provision more Datacap. There's also things around your Datacap balance is very fungible. Like say you send out a bunch of deal proposals and they don't get sealed, and you're waiting for that Datacap to come back because the deal proposal expires, as opposed to like knowing that it's been committed. And so there's some interesting like pros for this. And then on the trade-off side, it's harder for us to effectively catch abuse. In my opinion, the challenge is like today, say a client gets away with faking an application, convinces notaries to give them Datacap, we still have an option to bring that Datacap back until they seal it in deals. And as a community, I think we all agree that we need to get to the point where we can even bring Datacap out of sealed sectors. With this, you're introducing a different step where it's really easy to allocate it and put it away in the chain. And so it becomes like very challenging to go and remove it from an allocation, and that has not been outlined. And so that's my personal hesitation, is effectively we need some mechanism where just because a client swindled the notaries, they can't suddenly have redeemed that 100 tebibytes and like take their own sweet time to go and seal it, because now they're going to reap those rewards no matter what we do as a community. And so I'm requesting the FIP authors and the researchers to basically say, hey, maybe we need a mechanism where we can repeal Datacap even from like an allocated batch before it's been sealed in deals. And so that's where that conversation is at. That one's evolved a lot. It was actually pitched in a Fil Plus governance call in March. It looks very different than it did today. And it's pretty active. I think Alex North is driving that one. And even until yesterday, he's been posting like pretty major amendments and long comments. And so a little bit of a harder one to follow, a lot of complexity. But I'm happy to chat about it specifically later this week if anybody has specific questions. I'm still learning too. So if I lied or said anything wrong or I misspoke, apologies. Hopefully that helps.